In a lively city neighborhood, where the hum of daily life filled the air, tensions between the residents and the police had been building for years. People often whispered about unfair treatment and harsh encounters with law enforcement, but nothing had reached a boiling point until one fateful evening. Maya Carter, a hard-working 32-year-old black woman and single mother of two, was driving home after finishing her second job of the day. Her shift at the diner had ended late, and all she wanted was to get back to her kids, make sure they were safe, and maybe steal a few moments of rest before starting the cycle again. The streets were quiet as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. As Maya approached a red light, she noticed something troubling, a flickering taillight on her car. It wasn't working properly, and she knew it would need fixing soon. Not wanting to risk getting pulled over later, she decided to grab her vehicle registration from the glove compartment while waiting for the light to turn green. She rummaged through papers, trying to locate the document quickly. Unbeknownst to her, Officer Greg Harris had just arrived at the scene. Known within the department for his short temper and questionable behavior, Harris had earned a reputation among the community as someone who didn't treat everyone equally. Some people even avoided him if they saw him patrolling their area. Unfortunately for Maya, Harris happened to be assigned to this part of town that night. When Harris pulled up behind Maya's car, he immediately noticed the broken taillight. But instead of simply issuing a warning or writing a ticket, he became suspicious. His mind jumped to conclusions, fueled by stereotypes he had carried for years. He tapped on Maya's window, motioning for her to roll it down. Startled, Maya turned toward the sound but didn't react instantly because she was still searching for the registration. Harris grew impatient. To him, Maya's delayed response seemed like defiance rather than an innocent oversight. His frustration mounted, and without giving her a chance to explain herself, he yanked open the car door. Maya gasped, clutching the steering wheel in shock. Before she could say anything, Harris grabbed her arm forcefully and pulled her out of the vehicle. The cold pavement scraped against Maya's knees as she stumbled onto the ground. Pain shot through her body, but she barely had time to process what was happening before Harris raised his baton and struck her across the arm. A sharp crack echoed through the otherwise peaceful street. Maya cried out in agony, clutching her injured limb as tears streamed down her face. Witnesses who had been walking by stopped in their tracks, horrified by what they were witnessing. One woman covered her mouth with her hands, unable to believe what she was seeing. Another man pulled out his phone and began recording the incident, knowing it needed to be documented. Cars slowed down as drivers craned their necks to see what was going on. The once quiet neighborhood now buzzed with tension. But then something unexpected happened. As Harris stood over Maya, his expression changed. For a brief moment, his hardened demeanor faltered. Instead of continuing his aggression, he froze, staring down at the woman writhing in pain. Something inside him shifted. Perhaps guilt, perhaps regret, but whatever it was, it hit him hard. Slowly, almost robotically, Harris dropped the baton. It clattered to the ground beside Maya, adding another jarring noise to the surreal scene. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Harris sank to his knees right there on the street. Tears welled up in his eyes as he leaned forward, pleading desperately. "I'm sorry," he choked out, his voice trembling. "I'm so sorry." He repeated the words over and over, as though trying to convince not only Maya but also himself. Maya, despite the searing pain in her arm, managed to look up at him. Her eyes reflected a mix of confusion, anger, and disbelief. "Why?" she asked weakly, her voice barely audible. "Why did you do this?" Her question hung in the air, heavier than any accusation could have been. Harris didn't answer. He couldn't. He just stayed on his knees, sobbing uncontrollably as the crowd around them watched in stunned silence. Word of the incident spread like wildfire. Videos recorded by witnesses appeared online within minutes, sparking outrage and disbelief. Social media platforms lit up with posts condemning Harris's actions while praising Maya's resilience. Hashtags calling for justice began trending nationwide, drawing attention to the deep-rooted issues of racism and police brutality that had plagued communities for far too long. For Maya, the night was far from over. After an ambulance arrived to take her to the hospital, doctors confirmed that her arm was badly broken. The physical pain was excruciating, but it paled in comparison to the emotional toll the incident took on her. Lying in the sterile hospital bed, Maya replayed the events in her mind, struggling to understand how such a routine moment could spiral into violence so quickly. Meanwhile, Harris's breakdown became the talk of the precinct. His colleagues were baffled by his sudden display of remorse. Some dismissed it as a desperate attempt to save face, while others wondered if there was more to the story. Whatever the reason, the image of a seasoned officer collapsing in tears on the street left a lasting impression on everyone who witnessed it or heard about it afterward. As the hours passed, the neighborhood transformed into a hub of activity. Protesters gathered near the site of the incident, holding signs that read, "Justice for Maya" and "Enough is enough." Their chants echoed through the streets, demanding accountability, not just for Harris, but for the system that allowed such incidents to occur repeatedly. Maya's name became synonymous with courage and resilience, even though she never asked to be thrust into the spotlight. What started as an ordinary evening had turned into a pivotal moment, for Maya, for Harris, and for the entire community. Little did anyone know this was only the beginning of a much larger story, one that would challenge perceptions, spark change, and leave an indelible mark on everyone involved. The days following the incident were a whirlwind of emotions, media coverage, and community outcry. Maya Carter's story dominated headlines across the country, sparking debates about systemic racism, police accountability, and the need for reform. But behind the scenes, Officer Greg Harris's inexplicable breakdown continued to puzzle those who witnessed it, and even Harris himself. After being placed on administrative leave pending an investigation, Harris retreated into his small apartment, shutting out the world. The weight of what he had done pressed down on him like a physical force. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to sit quietly with his thoughts, but they weren't kind. Flashes of that night replayed in his mind over and over again. Maya's terrified expression as she stumbled onto the pavement, the sickening crack of the baton against her arm, and then his own humiliating collapse onto his knees. Each memory felt heavier than the last, dragging him deeper into despair. Harris wasn't sleeping. He barely ate. His colleagues tried reaching out, offering hollow words of support or thinly veiled criticism, but he ignored their calls. Instead, he spent hours staring at old photographs scattered across his cluttered coffee table. One picture caught his eye repeatedly, a faded photo of him and his younger sister Sarah sitting together on a porch swing. They looked so happy, so innocent. Sarah's bright smile radiated from the frame, a stark contrast to the grim reality Harris now faced. Sarah had been adopted when Harris was just 6 years old. At the time, he didn't fully understand why she left. All he knew was that one day she was there, and the next, she wasn't. Their father, a stern man with a temper, often told Harris that Sarah had gone to live with better people because their family couldn't provide for her. As Harris grew older, he realized the truth. Sarah, who was black, had been taken in by another family after child services intervened due to neglect and abuse in their household. Harris never forgave himself, or his father, for letting her go. For decades, Harris buried these memories deep inside, focusing instead on building a career in law enforcement. He convinced himself that becoming a police officer would give him power, respect, and control, all things he desperately craved after feeling powerless as a child. But along the way, he absorbed toxic ideologies about authority and race, perpetuating cycles of harm without questioning them. Now staring at Sarah's face in the photograph, Harris couldn't ignore the parallels between his past and the present. What haunted him most was how much Maya reminded him of Sarah. Her features, her voice, even the way she looked at him with quiet defiance, it was all eerily familiar. In that moment on the street, something inside Harris snapped. It wasn't just guilt or shame, it was grief. Grief for the life he could have shared with Sarah if circumstances had been different. Grief for the countless lives he had impacted negatively through his actions as a police officer. And grief for the person he had become, a man unrecognizable to his younger self. As investigators dug deeper into Harris's background, they uncovered troubling patterns in his behavior. Multiple complaints had been filed against him over the years, many involving excessive force or discriminatory practices. Yet each time, internal reviews cleared him of wrongdoing, allowing him to continue patrolling the streets unchecked. This revelation only fueled public outrage, with activists calling not just for Harris's removal, but for sweeping reforms within the department. Meanwhile, Maya found herself thrust into the spotlight, a role she neither sought nor wanted. Journalists camped outside her home, hoping to get an exclusive interview. Social media influencers praised her resilience, turning her into a symbol of resistance against police brutality. While some celebrated her strength, others criticized her for not being vocal enough, accusing her of not doing enough to fight back. The pressure mounted, leaving Maya feeling overwhelmed and isolated. Despite everything, Maya refused to let bitterness consume her. She leaned on her faith and the unwavering support of her children, who reminded her daily of why she needed to keep going. Friends and neighbors rallied around her, organizing fundraisers to help cover her medical expenses and legal fees. Slowly, Maya began to find her voice, not just as a victim of injustice, but as someone determined to create change. One evening, while scrolling through social media, Maya came across a video of Harris speaking publicly for the first time since the incident. In the clip, he sat slumped in a chair, his eyes red and swollen from crying. "I don't expect anyone to forgive me," he said, his voice trembling. "But I want you to know that I'm sorry, not just to Maya, but to everyone. I've hurt. I've failed as a human being, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make amends." Maya paused the video, unsure of what to feel. Part of her wanted to dismiss his apology as insincere, a calculated attempt to save face. But another part of her recognized the raw pain in his words. She thought about her own journey toward healing, and wondered whether forgiveness, even in its smallest form, might be possible someday. Not for Harris's sake, but for hers. The community, however, remained divided. Some saw Harris's confession as a step toward accountability, while others dismissed it as too little, too late. Protesters continued to march through the streets, demanding justice not just for Maya, but for all victims of police violence. Activists pushed for policy changes, including stricter oversight of law enforcement and mandatory training on implicit bias. The movement gained momentum, drawing attention from lawmakers and civil rights organizations nationwide. Amid the chaos, Maya decided to take action. She started attending town hall meetings, sharing her story, and advocating for systemic change. Though speaking in front of large crowds terrified her, she drew strength from the knowledge that her words might inspire others to speak up. She also connected with other survivors of police brutality, forming bonds that helped her navigate the emotional scars left by the incident. As weeks turned into months, the case against Harris moved forward. Evidence piled up, painting a damning picture of his conduct both during the assault and throughout his career. Legal experts predicted a conviction, though questions lingered about whether true justice could ever be served. For Maya, the trial represented more than just holding one man accountable. It was an opportunity to shine a light on the larger issues plaguing society. Throughout it all, Harris wrestled with his conscience. He attended therapy sessions where he confronted the trauma of his childhood and the prejudices he had internalized as an adult. It was painful work, forcing him to acknowledge the ways in which he had contributed to systemic oppression. But for the first time in his life, Harris felt a glimmer of hope, a chance to rebuild himself, not as a figure of authority, but as someone committed to making amends. By the time the trial began, the nation was watching closely. News outlets provided live updates and social media buzzed with anticipation. Maya prepared to face Harris in court, knowing that this moment would shape not only her future, but the futures of countless others who had endured similar injustices. As she stood before the judge, Ready to deliver her victim impact statement, she took a deep breath, reminding herself of the purpose behind her pain: to ensure no one else had to suffer the way she did. Though the road ahead promised challenges, Maya held on to the belief that change was possible, and somewhere far removed from the courtroom drama, Harris clung to the same hope: that redemption, no matter how distant, might still be within reach. The courtroom was packed on the day of Officer Greg Harris's trial. Reporters jostled for seats, cameras clicked incessantly, and murmurs filled the air as people waited for proceedings to begin. Maya Carter sat in the front row, flanked by her family and attorneys. Her presence commanded attention, not because she sought it, but because her quiet dignity spoke volumes. She wore a simple yet elegant dress, its deep blue color symbolizing strength and resilience. Every now and then, she glanced at her children seated beside her, drawing courage from their unwavering support. Harris entered the room moments later, escorted by 2 bailiffs. His appearance shocked many who remembered him as the imposing figure from the viral videos. Now he looked gaunt and defeated, his face pale and his eyes downcast. He shuffled to his seat without making eye contact with anyone, especially not Maya. The contrast between the man who once wielded power so recklessly and the broken individual before them was striking. As the judge called the court to order, the prosecution began laying out its case. They presented video footage captured by bystanders, showing Harris dragging Maya out of her car and striking her with his baton. Witness testimonies followed, each account painting a vivid picture of the brutality Maya endured. One elderly woman recounted how Harris's actions left her trembling with fear, while another described the collective gasp of disbelief when he fell to his knees and begged for forgiveness. These stories painted Harris not just as an officer who crossed a line, but as a symbol of systemic failure within law enforcement. But the most compelling evidence came from internal records obtained during the investigation. Documents revealed a pattern of misconduct stretching back years: complaints filed by citizens alleging racial profiling, excessive force, and verbal abuse. Many of these cases had been dismissed or swept under the rug, allowing Harris to continue patrolling the streets unchecked. The defense argued that these allegations were unsubstantiated, but the sheer volume of complaints made it impossible to ignore the glaring red flags. When it was Harris's turn to testify, the atmosphere shifted. For the first time, he addressed the court directly, speaking slowly and deliberately. "I can't undo what I've done," he began, his voice cracking with emotion. "And I don't expect anyone to forgive me. But I need you to know that I'm sorry, not just to Maya but to everyone I've hurt." He paused, taking a shaky breath before continuing. "That night, something inside me broke. When I saw Maya on the ground, all I could think about was my sister, Sarah. She was taken away from me when I was 6, and I never forgave myself for letting her go." Harris went on to describe his troubled childhood, growing up in a home marked by neglect and violence. His father, a bitter man with deeply ingrained prejudices, taught him to equate authority with control and vulnerability with weakness. As Harris grew older, he carried those lessons into his career, using his position as a police officer to assert dominance over others. "I became someone I didn't recognize," he admitted, tears streaming down his face. "Someone who hurt innocent people instead of protecting them." His confession stunned the courtroom. Some spectators whispered among themselves, questioning whether Harris's words were genuine or merely an attempt to garner sympathy. Others, however, couldn't deny the raw pain in his voice. Even Maya found herself caught between anger and empathy. While she couldn't condone his actions, she recognized the weight of his admission, a rare moment of accountability in a system often resistant to change. Following Harris's testimony, Maya took the stand to deliver her victim impact statement. Standing before the judge, she held her head high despite the tremor in her hands. "What happened to me that night wasn't just an isolated incident," she began, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "It was the result of a system that allows officers like Greg Harris to operate without consequence. It's a system that devalues Black lives and perpetuates fear in our communities." She went on to describe the physical and emotional toll the assault had taken on her. Her broken arm required multiple surgeries, leaving her unable to work for months. The trauma lingered, manifesting in sleepless nights and panic attacks triggered by sudden noises. Yet Maya refused to let bitterness consume her. "I won't let this define me," she declared, her voice growing stronger. "Instead, I'll use my experience to fight for justice, not just for myself but for everyone who has suffered because of racism and police brutality." Her words resonated deeply, earning nods of approval from supporters in the audience. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered holding signs that read "Justice for Maya" and "Reform Now." Activists seized the opportunity to amplify calls for systemic change, organizing rallies and petition drives aimed at holding law enforcement accountable. The movement gained momentum, drawing attention from lawmakers and civil rights organizations nationwide. Amid the public outcry, Harris's story sparked debates about redemption and rehabilitation. Could someone like him ever truly atone for his actions? Some argued that personal struggles didn't excuse systemic harm, while others believed acknowledging wrongdoing was the first step toward meaningful change. Regardless of where people stood, one thing was clear. Harris's breakdown had forced society to confront uncomfortable truths about race, power, and accountability. In the weeks leading up to the verdict, Maya channeled her energy into advocacy work. She partnered with local organizations to host workshops on policing reform and community empowerment. She also connected with other survivors of police violence, forming a network of support that helped her navigate the emotional scars left by the incident. Through it all, she remained focused on her mission, ensuring no one else had to endure what she did. For Harris, the weight was agonizing. He spent his days reflecting on his past mistakes and exploring ways to contribute positively to society. Therapy sessions helped him unpack the trauma of his childhood and the prejudices he had internalized as an adult. Slowly, he began envisioning a future where he could advocate for change rather than perpetuate harm. Though he knew forgiveness might never come, he clung to the hope that his transformation could inspire others to examine their own biases. When the jury finally reached a decision, tension hung thick in the air. The courtroom fell silent as the foreperson stood to deliver the verdict, guilty on all counts. A wave of relief washed over Maya, though she knew the sentence alone wouldn't heal the wounds inflicted by years of systemic injustice. Still, it was a victory, a testament to the power of resilience and collective action. As Harris was led away in handcuffs, Maya allowed herself a small smile. This wasn't the end of her journey. It was only the beginning. With renewed determination, she vowed to keep fighting, not just for justice, but for a world where compassion triumphed over cruelty. And somewhere, far removed from the courtroom, drama, Harris resolved to do the same, knowing that redemption, though distant, was still worth pursuing. The sentencing hearing arrived and the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. It was a pivotal moment, not just for Maya Carter and Greg Harris, but for the entire community that had rallied around the case. Reporters filled every available seat, their cameras trained on the front row where Maya sat alongside her family. Her children, now accustomed to the spotlight thrust upon them, held her hands tightly, offering silent support. Across the aisle, Harris sat with his attorney, his face pale and drawn, his eyes fixed on the floor. The weight of the verdict hung heavily in the air. When the judge entered the room, a hush fell over the crowd. After reviewing the evidence and hearing final statements from both sides, the judge delivered the sentence: 5 years in prison without eligibility for parole. The decision drew mixed reactions. Some cheered quietly, seeing it as a hard-fought victory. Others whispered among themselves, wondering if it was enough. For Maya, the sentence wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about accountability. She believed that true justice required more than locking someone away. It demanded systemic change. As Harris was escorted out of the courtroom, he glanced briefly at Maya. Their eyes met for a fleeting second before he looked away, unable to hold her gaze. Maya didn't flinch. Instead, she felt a strange sense of calm. This chapter of her life was closing, but she knew there was still much work to be done. Outside the courthouse, supporters gathered, holding signs and chanting slogans calling for police reform. Maya addressed the crowd, her voice steady and resolute. "This is not the end," she said. "It's the start of a new fight. A fight for fairness, equality, and justice." In the weeks following the trial, Maya threw herself into advocacy work. She founded an organization called Voices for Change, dedicated to supporting victims of police brutality and pushing for legislative reforms. Through fundraisers, workshops, and community events, Maya worked tirelessly to ensure her experience wouldn't be in vain. Her efforts quickly gained traction, attracting volunteers and donors eager to contribute to the cause. Local leaders praised her courage, while national figures amplified her message, helping bring attention to the broader issue of systemic racism within law enforcement. Maya also collaborated with other survivors of police violence, building a network of mutual support. These connections proved invaluable, providing emotional strength and practical resources. Together, they drafted petitions urging lawmakers to implement stricter oversight of police departments, including independent review boards and mandatory de-escalation training. They organized rallies, marched through city streets, and met with politicians demanding action rather than empty promises. Slowly but surely, their voices began to make an impact. Meanwhile, behind bars, Harris embarked on his own journey of reflection and transformation. Life in prison was harsh, but he embraced it as an opportunity to confront his past mistakes. Assigned to a rehabilitation program focused on addressing bias and fostering empathy, Harris participated actively, sharing his story with fellow inmates. Many were skeptical at first, dismissing him as another officer trying to save face. But as he opened up about his troubled childhood, his estranged sister Sarah, and the night that changed everything, some began to see him differently. Harris also immersed himself in reading and education, devouring books on racial inequality, psychology, and restorative justice. He wrote letters to civil rights organizations, seeking guidance and expressing his desire to help dismantle the very system he had once upheld. Though responses were few, those who replied encouraged him to keep learning and growing. Over time, Harris became a mentor to younger inmates, teaching them skills like conflict resolution and emotional regulation. His transformation, though gradual, earned him a measure of respect among his peers. Back in the outside world, public interest in Harris's story waned as attention shifted to other pressing issues. Yet whispers of his unusual path persisted. Documentaries and podcasts explored the complexities of his case, asking whether redemption was possible for someone like him. While opinions remained divided, one thing was clear. Harris's breakdown and subsequent confession had forced society to grapple with uncomfortable truths about race, power, and accountability. For Maya, these debates underscored the importance of her advocacy work. She traveled across the country, speaking at conferences and universities about her experience. Audiences listened intently as she described the trauma of that fateful night and the resilience it took to rise above it. Her speeches often ended with a call to action. "We must demand better from our institutions," she would say. "But we must also challenge ourselves to be better, to listen, to learn, and to act." Her words resonated deeply, inspiring countless individuals to join the movement for change. High school students organized walkouts in solidarity with victims of police violence. College campuses hosted panel discussions on systemic racism. Even corporations pledged to diversify their leadership teams and implement anti-bias training programs. The ripple effects of Maya's advocacy extended far beyond what she could have imagined. As the years passed, progress, though slow, became visible. Several states enacted laws requiring body cameras for all officers and establishing civilian oversight committees. Police departments introduced reforms aimed at reducing incidents of excessive force. While critics argued these measures didn't go far enough, advocates celebrated them as steps in the right direction. Maya played a key role in shaping many of these policies, testifying before legislative bodies and consulting with policymakers. On the 5th anniversary of the incident, Maya stood before a large crowd at a memorial event honoring victims of police brutality. Her children, now teenagers, stood proudly beside her, embodying the hope and determination she had instilled in them. As she spoke, her voice carried a tone of cautious optimism. "We've come a long way," she said, "but there's still so much work to do. Let us honor those we've lost by continuing to push for a future where everyone is treated with dignity and respect." That same day, Greg Harris was released from prison. Having served his full term, he emerged a changed man. With no job prospects and little support from former colleagues, he struggled to reintegrate into society. Yet he remained committed to making amends. He joined grassroots organizations advocating for police reform, sharing his story at community meetings and educational forums. Though forgiveness eluded him from many, including Maya, he found solace in knowing he was contributing to a larger cause. Years later, when asked about her journey, Maya reflected on how far she had come. "I never wanted to be a symbol," she admitted. "I just wanted to live my life in peace, but sometimes life gives you challenges you didn't ask for, and it's up to you to decide how to respond." Her response, a relentless pursuit of justice and healing, inspired countless others to follow in her footsteps. And Harris? Though his name remained tarnished, his efforts to educate and advocate earned him a small measure of redemption. He often thought about Maya's question from that night, "Why did you do this?" The answer, he realized, lay not just in his personal failings but in the systemic flaws that allowed such tragedies to occur. By dedicating himself to dismantling those flaws, he hoped to honor the lives impacted by his actions, and perhaps, one day, find a measure of peace. Through it all, Maya and Harris remained symbols of contrasting paths, one forged through resilience and activism, the other through remorse and redemption. Together, their stories reminded the world that while the scars of injustice run deep, they can also serve as catalysts for profound change. Years after the incident that changed both their lives forever, Maya Carter and Greg Harris found themselves on vastly different paths, yet bound together by the shared memory of that fateful night. The scars they carried, physical, emotional, and societal, remained visible, but each had learned to navigate their wounds in ways that reflected growth, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to change. Maya's advocacy work with Voices for Change had grown into a national movement. What started as a small grassroots effort in her community evolved into a powerful force driving meaningful reform across the country. Her organization partnered with policymakers, law enforcement agencies, and civil rights groups to create initiatives aimed at fostering trust between police officers and the communities they served. Training programs focused on de-escalation techniques, implicit bias awareness, and mental health support became mandatory in several states thanks to her relentless campaigning. But Maya didn't stop there. She understood that true progress required addressing root causes rather than just symptoms. So, she expanded Voices for Change to include mentorship programs for young people, particularly those from marginalized backgrounds. These programs provided tutoring, career guidance, and safe spaces where kids could express themselves freely, without fear of judgment or violence. Maya often visited schools to share her story, emphasizing the importance of standing up against injustice while encouraging students to pursue education as a tool for empowerment. Her children, now teenagers, were proud of the legacy she was building. They saw firsthand how their mother turned pain into purpose, transforming not only her own life but also the lives of countless others. At rallies and events, Maya frequently introduced them to the crowd saying, "These are the faces of our future. Let's make sure we leave behind a world where they can thrive." Meanwhile, Greg Harris walked a quieter path, one marked by humility and hard work. After his release from prison, he faced numerous challenges reintegrating into society. Many doors remained closed to him due to his criminal record and tarnished reputation, but instead of succumbing to bitterness, Harris leaned into the lessons he'd learned during his incarceration. He took odd jobs wherever he could find them, cleaning offices, working construction sites, anything to stay afloat. Each paycheck felt like a small victory, proof that he was capable of rebuilding his life piece by piece. Harris also continued volunteering with grassroots organizations focused on criminal justice reform and police accountability. Though some dismissed his involvement as insincere, others welcomed his perspective, recognizing the value of having someone who had once been part of the problem actively working to fix it. At community meetings, he spoke candidly about his past mistakes, urging listeners to confront their own biases and prejudices. His honesty resonated with many, especially younger attendees who appreciated his willingness to be vulnerable. One day, Harris received an invitation to speak at a conference hosted by Voices for Change. Initially hesitant, fearing backlash, from Maya and her supporters, he decided to accept. Standing on stage facing hundreds of people, including Maya herself, he delivered a heartfelt speech. "I'll never forget the harm I caused," he said, his voice steady despite the weight of his words, "and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make amends. But let me be clear, this isn't about me. It's about all of us coming together to build a better system, one that protects everyone equally." The audience erupted in applause, moved by his sincerity. For Maya, watching Harris address the crowd stirred conflicting emotions. While forgiveness remained elusive, she acknowledged his efforts to contribute positively to the conversation. After the event, she approached him briefly, offering a nod of acknowledgement. It wasn't forgiveness, it was recognition of progress. And for Harris, that small gesture meant more than he could put into words. As time went on, Maya's influence extended beyond policy changes and community programs. She became a symbol of resilience, inspiring individuals worldwide to channel their struggles into action. Documentaries, books, and even a feature film chronicled her journey, amplifying her message to global audiences. Yet despite the accolades and recognition, Maya stayed grounded, always reminding herself and others that real change happened on the ground, in everyday interactions and choices. For Harris, redemption came in unexpected forms. A local church invited him to join its outreach program, which worked with formerly incarcerated individuals seeking second chances. There, he found a sense of belonging he hadn't experienced in years. He mentored ex-offenders, helping them navigate the challenges of re-entry and encouraging them to use their experiences to help others. Over time, Harris became a trusted figure within the community, someone people turned to for advice and support. Though their lives rarely intersected directly, Maya and Harris occasionally crossed paths at events or panel discussions. Their relationship remained complicated, respectful but distant. Yet both recognized that their stories were intertwined, serving as reminders of humanity's capacity for both harm and healing. They embodied two sides of the same coin, one forged through resilience and determination, the other through remorse and transformation. By the 10-year anniversary of the incident, significant strides had been made toward systemic reform. Body cameras were standard issue for police officers nationwide, civilian oversight boards held greater authority, and training programs emphasized empathy and cultural competence. Crime rates in many cities decreased as trust between law enforcement and residents improved. While challenges persisted, the momentum for change showed no signs of slowing down. To mark the occasion, Maya organized a large gathering in the park where protests had once erupted. Thousands attended, united by a shared vision of justice and equality. As Maya stood before the crowd, her children by her side, she reflected on how far they'd come. "We've fought hard," she said, her voice filled with emotion, "and we've achieved so much. But let's not lose sight of why we started this fight, to ensure no one has to live in fear because of the color of their skin." In the audience, Harris listened intently, nodding along with her words. Later that evening, he sat alone in his modest apartment, reflecting on the day's events. A framed photo of Sarah, the sister he had lost so long ago, sat on his desk. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to smile. Redemption might have been a distant dream when he knelt on that cold street begging for forgiveness, but today, it felt closer than ever. Maya and Harris may never fully reconcile their pasts, nor should they. Forgiveness is deeply personal, and healing takes time. But what mattered most was the impact of their journeys, not just on themselves but on the world around them. Through their pain, courage, and determination, they reminded everyone that, even in the darkest moments, hope can shine through. And sometimes that hope is enough to spark a revolution.